Hey everybody, Thomas Joseph here, and today we are focusing on focaccia. Now, focaccia is a little bit of a process, and most people are intimidated with this recipe because it takes a good amount of time. But it's relatively simple. You just need a good day to make a really delicious focaccia that's crisp on the outside, but light and pillowy on the inside. So let's get started. First step in making our beautiful focaccia dough is with the yeast. So I have 3/4 teaspoon of active dry yeast. This isn't that much yeast for the recipe itself, but what we're working with here is thyme. Thyme is going to allow the yeast to multiply, which is going to give us really great flavor and also a really nice texture. So 3/4 teaspoon of yeast, and I have 2 1/4 cups of warm water. Now, when I say warm water, when you're making bread, when you're using yeast, you want to make sure it's around 105 to maybe 110 degrees. You're looking for warm temperature water so that the yeast can activate itself and start the whole process. Now, this is just the process of really hydrating the yeast. If you want to see if the yeast is nice and active and will do its job in the end, you can add a little pinch of sugar here and it should start to get nice and creamy and a little bubbly. But today I'm using really fresh yeast from the market that I've used in a few recipes, so I know that it's ready and working. Now, let this sit for just a little bit. You can even kind of whisk this in to really dissolve the yeast and get it moving and hydrated. And then in the mixer bowl here, I have 4 3/4 cups of bread flour. Now, bread flour is a flour that has a higher protein content for the most part than all-purpose flour and a lot of other flours, and that's going to give you the strength and structure you need for a really fantastic focaccia. Again, we want it to be light and pillowy on the inside, but it should have a significant chew to it as well. That's kind of signature to a focaccia. So, our yeast, it's getting a little creamy and bubbly, you can see here. So now I'm going to add this mixture right into the flour. And then using the dough hook attachment, turn this on a nice kind of medium-low speed. And we're gonna mix this together until all of the water is being forced into the flour, hydrating the flour. And that's really what's gonna help develop the gluten that's going to give us the wonderful strength and structure to this dough. So this is going to take a few minutes to kind of come together. All right, so our dough is nicely mixed together. This is extremely tacky and sticky, so don't be alarmed if that's how your dough is. That's exactly how the recipe is supposed to be. Move this off to the side. Now I'm just going to use my fingers here to release the dough from the dough hook, but you could certainly use a rubber scraper. And this base dough, I like to call this, is going to rest in a nice warm spot. I'm going to cover it with some plastic wrap, and it's going to rise up really high in the bowl. It's going to take about 2 hours. The top is going to get really bubbly, so you'll start to really see the fermentation that's taking place and the flavor that's developing. And while that's working, I'm going to get started on my caramelized onions that are going to go in this dough. So I have a large skillet here. I'm going to add about 1 to 2 tablespoons of olive oil. Now this is set over a medium heat. You want to do something like medium-low. All we're trying to do is rid the onions of all their moisture, and then the natural sugars in the onions themselves are going to start caramelizing once all that extra moisture is released from the onions. So these are 6 good-sized onions that have been sliced into 1/4-inch slices. It really doesn't matter how you cut these up. You can even cut these into a nice dice. That's totally fine. I like to add a little bit of salt to help pull out the moisture and get the process going, but on a medium-low heat, this is gonna take about 45 minutes. All right, our base dough has risen nicely in the mixing bowl. You can see how voluminous this is. Our onions have cooked down into almost nothing and have cooled here. This is 6 onions. Can you even believe it? How much these caramelized onions cook down? So now is the time to marry all of our ingredients. Now, if you wanted to change up the flavors here, you could certainly do that. This is the point where you would add, hey, if you wanted to make a raisin focaccia, throw the raisins in now. If you wanted to add sun-dried tomatoes, do that here as well. You can also add herbs, so any flavorings that you like, add it to the base dough at this time. Now, I'm gonna use my dough hook attachment to bring all this together. So now I'm gonna add the salt, and this is 1 tablespoon plus 1.5 teaspoons of salt, and that's a long-winded way of saying 1.5 tablespoons of kosher salt. Now, I mention this all the time. We use Diamond Crystal. That's the brand of salt that we use in our recipe testing. If you're using Morton's, you want to use a little bit less salt here. And then if you're using table salt, oh my God, pull it back. I would say use about half of the quantity that we're calling for so that the dough isn't too salty. Now, add the cooled onions right into the dough. All right. And now we're gonna mix this on low speed for about 5 minutes. Now you might be saying like, okay, why are we doing this? Well, that's really the amount of time and the slow agitation that we need to mix the salt into all of the dough itself. And the reason why we didn't add it to the base of the dough is because salt inhibits yeast from working. So in the initial stage, to get the volume that we're looking for, we didn't add the salt. That's why it's added at this point. All right, the dough has been on low speed for about 5 minutes. The onions are somewhat incorporated in the dough, and I'm just gonna speed this up to like medium-high speed for about 30 seconds so the dough really starts to cling around the dough hook. It'll make it easier to get out of the bowl. All right, this looks great. It's nice and stringy and sticky, so do not be alarmed that this is the way the dough looks. It really needs to be wet and tacky because in the end that's going to give you a really amazing focaccia. So I'm going to remove the bowl from my stand mixer. I'm going to push this off to the side, and then on a well-floured surface, this is just standard all-purpose flour. You could use bread flour, really whatever you have on hand. And this goes right onto your work surface. A little bit of flour over the top and on your hands, even on the tools that you're using. And what we need to do is kind of just turn this dough or fold the dough into a nice parcel. And do this a few times, and what it helps to do is it helps to kind of make a cohesive dough, a little less tacky in the end. So take the scraper under one side, fold it up into the middle. If you have any extra flour, you can kind of just dust it off. It's better to have more flour so that you don't make too much of a mess to start, but as we go through this process of folding, you don't want to use too much flour in the end, the next stage, which you'll see. So bring the corners in, just gently fold this down into a parcel. And then this is going into a bowl. Just like to flip it over into the bowl. Cover with plastic wrap, and now this has to proof for about 45 minutes. So we did our initial proof of the base dough. This is the next set of proofing, and then we're gonna even do it again. So again, we're trying to really capture a lot of great flavor and good volume. So warm spot, 45 minutes. All right, our beautiful dough has been resting for about 45 minutes again. You can see that it is risen nicely in this bowl. Now I'm gonna remove the plastic wrap, put this off to the side because we're gonna repurpose that. And now I'm going to do a second turn on this dough. So the first turn or folding that we were doing was right after we added the onions. Now I'm going to do a second turn, just lightly coat the surface with flour. I like to use these bowl scrapers. You can even flour that up a little bit. These are plastic, so bowl scraper, bench scraper. Bench scraper is usually metal. It's very sturdy and the edge is a little bit sharp. So this is great for kind of cutting through doughs, like if you're making biscuits or something like that. Some people even use this to cube up butter when they're making pastry. Bowl scrapers are really flexible, so they're great for getting sticky doughs like this out of the bowl, or if you're making a beautiful frosting in a stand mixer bowl, you can use the bowl scraper to kind of help you get all around the corners. Now, I'm gonna just loosen this along the sides. Again, you can see that this scraper can kind of conform to the sides of the bowl here nicely, and just push this out onto your surface. It smells really great. All of those wonderful caramelized onions are really gonna give this focaccia nice flavor. So now I'm gonna even flour the top just a little bit, and take your bowl scraper, bench scraper, whatever you want to use right now, and just take the scraper underneath, give it a good swipe into the dough, and then pick the dough up and put it on top of itself, right in the middle. And then you're gonna kind of repeat this process around the four corners of the dough, folding it into essentially a sloppy square, and then repeat the process with the corners again, And what this is doing is it's essentially deflating all of those bubbles that we just created. And you might be saying, why are you doing that? Well, the whole point behind this is we're creating strength and structure, and we're also developing flavor as well. So strength and structure in terms of, okay, we're letting the yeast proof up, provide really great bubbles that we're then collapsing, which is going to give a beautiful texture to the inside of the focaccia. And also, in deflating all of the carbon dioxide that the yeast has produced, we're getting increased flavor. So the longer you ferment things or allow the yeast to do its thing, the more beautiful flavor you're gonna get in the end. So that's why a lot of people do some proofing overnight in the refrigerator, so a lower temperature, which takes a lot longer for things to ferment and proof, but it really does provide a delicious flavor in the end. So I'm just doing this 8 or 9 times, again, picking up the sides, putting them in the middle, and this looks pretty good. I'm gonna take that same bowl that I was using before, pick up the dough, loosen it from the bench, and flip it right in, cover it with plastic, and this needs to now rest, again, in a warm place for 45 minutes until it's doubled in bulk, and then we'll be ready to place this in our baking pan. So the dough has been resting for about 45 minutes. Now this is after the 2 folding stages. I have 1/3 cup of olive oil here. I'm going to just pour the majority of it into the bottom of my pan. Leave a little bit off to the side. I'll show you what to do with that in a little bit. Now, using your clean hands here, just kind of smooth the oil out into all of the sides and corners of the pan. You want to give this a nice coating of oil because you don't want the focaccia to stick. And it also really helps here to get your fingertips nice and oiled so that the dough doesn't stick to your hands. Now what I'm gonna do is pick up the dough, just kind of sink my hands into the sides of the bowls to really get it out. And you can see how beautiful and elastic the dough is. And this is how you know you're gonna have a really great texture to your focaccia in the end. So spread the dough out. Don't be afraid, it might get a little sticky, and if it is giving you any kind of resistance in working it out to the sides of the pan, you can always just let it sit for about 5 to 10 minutes, and you should be able to spread it out even further. So just kind of coax it out into the corners, and of course, this is gonna proof again for about another 45 minutes. So it will kind of fill up the space of the pan. So that looks pretty good to start. And one of the things you can certainly do here is dip your fingertips into the oil and to create some really great dimples in the focaccia, you know, those nice little bubbles that you get that have a really great texture. Just take your fingertips and really push the dough down into the bottom of the pan. And this looks great. So now it's time to top the focaccia. So take all of the beautiful pieces of allium that you have, and you can arrange them how you see fit. So this is really where you can get a little bit creative. I should have done this before, but I'm just gonna take a little bit of oil and I'm gonna dress all of the beautiful toppings that we have for this focaccia. Now, and you can give it a little shake. I'm using chives today as well and a little bit of rosemary for extra flavor, but what I'm trying to do here is essentially create, I don't know, what looks like a garden in a way, where this is the ground or the soil and our beautiful allium is kind of growing up out of it. But really, this is all up to you and how you wanna kind of decorate and create a beautiful landscape in a way. So I'll take some of those pretty chives. I didn't mention this before, but you could certainly make this in a round pan as well. If you have an oversized, maybe a 14-inch pan, that would be fantastic. A little bit of rosemary kind of in and around. You could also use thyme here. Any kind of woodsy herb would be really fantastic. And then the rest of your oil, just drizzle it over the top. I'm gonna cover this with some plastic wrap, and this goes into a warm spot for another 45 minutes until it is risen. And make sure you guys have your oven preheated to about 450 degrees and put a pizza stone in the bottom of your oven. Make sure that's really well heated, and then I will tell you how we're gonna bake this beautiful focaccia. Our focaccia has been proofing for 45 minutes. You can see that there's some nice bubbles popping up here. It's risen, I would say, a little over halfway up the pan. And now I'm gonna sprinkle the top with a little bit of flaky sea salt. This is Malden salt here, but you could use, gray sea salt. It's gonna add a nice crunch and a little bit of salty goodness. And now this goes into the oven. And again, guys, the baking instructions, make sure you have a pizza stone in the bottom of the oven. Try to remove some of the racks closer to the bottom so that you have room to place your tray right on the pizza stone. And your oven should be preheated to 450 degrees. Now, if you have a convection oven at home, reduce the temperature down to about 425. And this is gonna bake for about 25 to 30 minutes. You wanna make sure that the top is nice and golden brown and also the bottom crust is nice and crispy. So if you need to sneak a spatula underneath to check, do that. But 25 to 30 minutes and we should have a beautiful focaccia. All right, look at this beautiful focaccia straight out of the oven. Now this is cranking hot, guys, and I'm gonna tell you to do something that might be a little difficult, but just make sure you have a nice hot pad on hand and one of these spatulas as well. Take the spatula, run it along the side of the pan. What we're trying to do here is just release the focaccia from the bottom and the sides and slide it out onto this cooling rack that I have here underneath. And you might be saying, okay, why don't you just let it cool down a little bit? Why are you trying to mess with it while it's still really, really hot? Well, the reason is we want to remove it from the pan so that it doesn't steam on the bottom. Just use your spatula to extricate the focaccia and then just gently slide this out. You can remove any of those wayward pieces of chives. But there you go, guys, a really beautiful focaccia. Again, this is a base recipe that you can customize in many different ways. I'm showing you the allium, the leek, and onion focaccia, but this can be doctored up with so many different toppings or inclusions. And just so you get an idea of what the bottom looks like, because I know I'm talking about this being super crispy, but yet pillowy on the inside. It's really hot, but I want you to see the underside. So I'm gonna give you a little bit of a turn there. Woo, it's folding, but you can see how golden brown that bottom is. Now, let this cool, I would say, to room temperature before you cut it into squares. But if you wanted to, you can also take a portion of this and you wrap it really well in plastic wrap, put it into a resealable bag, and you can also freeze focaccia, heat it up in the oven, and it's just as delicious. There you go, guys. We solved a kitchen conundrums for you, all about focaccia making at home. If you have any other kitchen conundrums, reach out to us using the hashtag kitchen conundrums or write in the comment section below. We'd love to hear from you. Enjoy. If you like videos like this, make sure you subscribe, like, hit the bell, and share.